significant pieces of civil rights legislation in history. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for July 2nd, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The state of deflate inside the Democratic Party is not going away. President Biden faces calls to leave the race, and more lawmakers are speaking out. We will total it all up and see what the new developments amount to in a conversation with longtime Washington reporter for USA Today, Susan Page. I've still got some questions about that Supreme Court ruling on immunity from Monday. We'll chop through those questions as the practical implications become a little bit more clear. Plus, a new report on Chinese spy activity in Cuba. Seems more notable than that balloon everyone was so exercised about months ago. We'll talk to the co-author of the new report about it. Plus, an update on Hurricane Beryl, a coup plot in Ukraine, and the white nationalists from Charlottesville nearly 7 years ago get hit with the bill. And finally, the nation's first dolly, the oldest photograph of First Lady, is up for auction. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with President Biden, unable to shake off his debate performance from last week. Campaign officials say he's not dropping out of the 2024 race, but that has not ended the conversation. Democratic officials have moved from private grumbling to public expressions of concern over his age and capacity.
Like a lot of people, I was pretty horrified by the debate, the blips of President Biden, and the barrage of lying from President Trump.
We have to be honest with ourselves that it wasn't just a horrible night, but I won't go beyond that.
I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition? And so when people ask that question, it's completely legitimate of both candidates.
On Tuesday, Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas took it a step further, saying in a statement, "I am hopeful that he will make the painful and difficult decision to withdraw. I respectfully call on him to do so." The president will sit down with ABC News this week for his first interview since that debate with Donald Trump. The campaign has also tried to reassure Democrats with fundraising numbers. The Biden team says it raised $264 million in the second quarter of the year, but it was not enough to eclipse the Trump campaign, which reported $331 million raised. Earlier, CBS News' Weijia Zhang asked the White House about the debate.
If it's not his stamina, if he prepared, as you guys say, for so long, if it's not a problem with his mental fitness, what happened that night?
He said, "I'm not as smooth as I used to be. I don't debate as well as I used to. I don't walk as easily as I used to. But one thing that he knows is how to deliver for the American people."
CBS News campaign reporter Nydia Cavazos asked Vice President Kamala Harris for her reaction to Democrats' concerns.
Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again, period.
Susan Page joins me now. She's the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Susan, it's good to be with you. I want to start with Nancy Pelosi because you are her biographer. So what better person to read between the lines? What do you hear when Nancy Pelosi says, "I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition"?
You know, John, I think your question is exactly right. Of all the Democrats, nervous Democrats you had quoted there in that piece, the one to listen to is Nancy Pelosi. That was, in Nancy Pelosi speak, that was an extraordinary admission of trouble for Biden and a message that was targeted right him. For her to say it's a legitimate question means it's not just the media overreacting. And for her to say, was it an episode or a condition? Which of those things sounds like a good thing for a presidential candidate to have? Oh. Neither one of them. I think that Pelosi's statement, more than anything else we heard today, opens the door to more trouble, more questions for Biden on whether he can stay at the top of the ticket.
So given that, you've covered Washington and you know what's the difference between a tempest in a teapot and what's a teapot dome, though you weren't covering the Harding administration. But is this real? Is it just a firestorm that will burn out? Help us understand given the great context you just gave us on Nancy Pelosi, kind of where this stands.
Yeah, I think this is not a tempest in a teapot. I mean, I think anyone who watched the debate, including some of Joe Biden's fiercest supporters and best friends, people who've worked with him for decades, were shocked by his performance, and it raised questions about his mental acuity. These are questions that the White House and the campaign have been dismissing as bedwetting, but it was there for 90 minutes for everyone to see that this is a significant issue for Joe Biden. And what did Nancy Pelosi say he had to do? Do several interviews with serious reporters. And there's also calls for him to do full-scale news conferences, which he has a record of almost never doing, fewer real news conferences than any of his modern predecessors. That would be a chance for people to see whether this was a bad night, as the White House is saying, or something more serious than that. But this has not gotten smaller as the days have passed since Thursday's debate. It continues to get bigger.
Just lingering for a moment on that idea of having lots of press conferences and things like that. I mean, let's imagine on the one hand that dispelled these questions about age. It nevertheless means he's opening himself up to a barrage of questions. I mean, that's not a walk in the park, even for the most seasoned politicians, to have that much steady fire from questioners.
News conferences are hard, although they are something we have come to expect presidents to do. And the fact that the White House has not scheduled news conferences is because they are concerned about the answers that Joe Biden would give, because they're concerned about his ability to speak clearly and quickly on his feet. And we saw an example of that in the debate. A debate is like a news conference. It's unscripted. And when we've seen Biden be effective in the days after the debate, including at that Friday rally in Raleigh, he was reading off a teleprompter. That is not going to persuade skeptics that he is up to the job.
USA Today recently had a poll on this question about, with respect to President Biden. How should we be thinking about public opinion and how it goes, initial responses versus what might linger?
Yeah, well, we saw Donald Trump gaining just over 3 points in our poll, now leading Biden by 3 points. But the more serious thing we saw was this: 41% of Democrats said they wanted Biden replaced at the top of the ticket. That is the number to watch, because it's Democrats who will nominate Joe Biden. It's Democrats to whom he will presumably listen, and they don't have much time. This nomination the roll call for the nomination. We expect it to take place in a couple weeks, even before the convention opens in August.
And finally, Susan, does this create any problems for, and how do they handle them, Democrats in tough races, either in congressional districts or some of those tough Senate races?
Yeah, this is one of the arguments we heard another Democratic Congressman, Mike Quigley, make today, was that Biden is putting at risk the rest of the ticket. We already have a situation where in some of these tight Senate races, the Senate candidates are leading Joe Biden. The Democratic Senate candidates are helping Joe Biden rather than the other way around. And if Joe Biden puts whole new states that we thought were safely Democratic in play, that is very serious news for Democrats holding the Senate and regaining the House.
Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief at USA Today. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, John.
It's been a day since the Supreme Court ruled that President Trump has immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts taken in office, but that he does not have that same protection from prosecution for unofficial acts. The 6-3 ruling, with conservatives in the majority, weakens special counsel Jack Smith's federal election interference case against Trump, since the allegations against Trump stem from his time in office. President Biden on Monday called the ruling an attack on the nation's legal principles.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed.
CBS News legal analyst and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, it's great to be with you again. The January 6th Trump case was on pause during the Supreme Court arguments. So how does it restart, and kind of how does it begin the restarting process?
Well, it goes back to Judge Chutkan, and she has the fairly unenviable job of now sorting through the complaint and determining what looks like an official act, what looks like an unofficial act. And those are the only acts that can go forward. One other thing to remember from what we talked about, John, last night is that you can't even use, under the majority's opinion here, evidence of official acts in order to try and prove criminal liability for those unofficial acts. And one more thing that Judge Chutkan has to do, let's remember, this wasn't the only decision involving Trump and that January 6th case. There was another case involving somebody else involved in January 6th, one of the rioters. And in that case, the Supreme Court said that federal prosecutors had gone beyond the scope of an obstruction statute that Trump is charged under in this January 6th case. And so Judge Chutkan is going to have to go back and figure out whether or not the obstruction statute is still a good fit for Trump's case. There's a lot of work for her to do here.
And when she's making this determination about official and unofficial, is that done in the abstract, or is evidence brought to bear from the prosecutors and anything like that?
This is such an important question because there will be evidence, there will be briefing, and there will likely be an evidentiary hearing. And John, that will be the closest to a trial that we will get before the election. And depending on who wins the election, it might be the only other criminal case that goes forward against the former president. But she's going to make this determination not in the abstract. She's going to hear from both attorneys, and then she's going to put on evidence, and she's going to make that determination based on the guidance from the Supreme Court. Does this look like something that the Constitution or a statute gives the president authority to do, or does it look like something a private citizen is doing?
Wow, so a whole bunch of new information is going to come out. Let me ask you about the former President Trump is trying to have his New York City conviction overturned because of the Supreme Court ruling. I gather that he will claim immunity because some of the checks or some of the falsified records were falsified while he was in office. What do you make of that argument, and is it likely to fly relative to what the Supreme Court said?
I don't make much of it. And let's remember that actually a federal judge already looked at this because former President Trump's team tried to get that New York State case removed up to the federal court. They thought they might get a better jury, I believe, in federal court. And so a federal judge already looked at those actions and said, I'm not seeing anything that looks like an official act. Now, of course, that was before the Supreme Court came out with its opinion yesterday. But I still think based on that reasoning, it's hard to see that signing a check is an official act. The other thing is there was a lot of other evidence in that New York case. So I think there's a good argument to be made that even if there was one piece of evidence that should not have been admitted, and again, I don't think we're there, but if we are, then I think there's a good argument to be made that we could consider that harmless error and that the verdict should still stand.
In our last little less than a minute, Jessica, this back to the decision and this question of presumptive immunity, those acts where the former president or then at the time president was engaged in and has presumptive immunity in the court case. Explain to us what that means in a court process. How does that work in practice if he has presumptive immunity?
Yeah, so this is going to be really important. So presumptive immunity means Judge Chutkan makes the first decision that, yes, there is an official act at issue here. And at that point, it then becomes the prosecutor's burden to say it is not a serious intrusion. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but a serious intrusion into the ability of the executive to function if we allow this charge to go forward. It's a very protective standard that says it is something where the prosecutor is really going to have to show there's no question that whoever is the president, they can still do their job, or a former president. It wouldn't intrude into the executive's ability to function if we let this particular charge go forward.
Jessica Levinson, a pleasure as always. Thank you for helping us get through all that. Hurricane Beryl is moving through the Caribbean. It briefly strengthened into a Category 5 storm Tuesday before being downgraded back to Category 4. Seawater usually isn't warm enough at this time of the year to produce that kind of strength, making this the strongest ever at this early part in the season. At least 6 people were killed when the storm made landfall in Grenada Monday. Areas of Jamaica are now under hurricane warnings in anticipation of the storm's arrival by early Wednesday. CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen is tracking things from Montego Bay. Tom, what is the latest on the ground there?
Hey there, John. Well, as you can see, we are standing outside of the Montego Bay Airport, and just moments ago, before we went live, there was a mad dash of people who were trying to get on flights. That's because they either had flights today in the nick of time, or there were extra flights that were added. For instance, American Airlines added 3 extra flights today, among other carriers. So people were really trying to get out of there. And that's after they saw all of those terrifying images coming out of those islands that you just mentioned. Before this, as we spoke to people on the ground, tourists and residents alike, they told us that they weren't terribly concerned. But once we turned that corner into the upper Category 4 region, into that Category 5, people started really listening and taking this seriously. Now, the mayor of Montego Bay, he says that people should be taking it seriously. This is not a cry wolf situation where they can just kind of brush off any of these advisories or warnings. They really need to be paying attention to the forecast and planning accordingly, because that storm surge, those strong winds, they are going to bear down on Jamaica. We are watching that very closely. That's going to happen in the morning hours through the day tomorrow. This is shaping up to be a powerful storm, even if it has been downgraded from a Category 5. That Category 4, no joke, that is 130 miles per hour to 165 mile per hour winds. Now consider this, the debris that is picked up in these kinds of systems. Imagine that hurling through the air at the speed of essentially a passenger train. That is the condition that we are going to be facing tomorrow, along with that very dangerous storm surge, which, as you know, can often be one of the most destructive parts of the hurricane, John. So certainly a serious situation that we are following very closely.
Yeah, that storm surge, dangerous, deadly, and it sneaks up on people. Tom Hansen in Montego Bay, Jamaica. Thank you very much, Tom. Still to come, America signs an agreement with Panama to help deport migrants crossing a popular transit point for those traveling to the southern border of America. Plus, Dr. Anthony Fauci speaks with our Major Garrett and offers thoughts on President Biden's health and debate performance. That's later this hour on the Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states
to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
New images of Cuba's electronic eavesdropping bases have been captured from space and are believed to be linked to China. This is according to a new report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The report highlights 4 recently upgraded electronic spying facilities in Cuba, including 3 near the country's capital of Havana. These facilities are located in the distant vicinity of at least 7 American military bases in the southeastern seaboard, including the USS Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay. Matthew Faniole joins me now. He's a senior fellow for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China Power Project, and is the co-author of the report. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. What do we know about these spy facilities and how involved is China?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for having me on. What we know from looking at quite a few years of satellite imagery is that these 4 sites have changed pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. That includes the expansion of the facilities, instrumentation being moved around, and then lastly, we're actually able to identify a brand new site that hasn't actually been reported yet. And what we're seeing there is a different configuration than at the other locations that may speak a little bit to its mission set. But overall, what we see is that there's a lot of change going on, there's expansion going on, and these are highly secretive and highly guarded facilities, which speaks to what they might be up to.
And do we think that Cuba wouldn't have capacity on its own to stand up this kind of surveillance, and therefore it's got to be backed by China or somebody else? And well, backed by China, and could it be anybody other than China?
I think China's the prime target here, is the prime suspect here for a couple of reasons. We know from administration official statements last year that China is growing its intelligence footprint in Cuba, is looking to expand that. And Cuba's in the midst of a pretty harsh financial crisis, economic crisis right now. So when you think of expanding and growing facilities, they're likely looking to an external partner to help them with that. And China's the likely fit.
The CBS News sat down with Cuba's foreign minister back in April, and he rejected the claims that China's operating any spy bases in Cuba. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Cuba's a relatively small country, and there are over 100 diplomatic missions in Cuba. None of them have ever seen, including a U.S. embassy, a spy station or any similar to that, or a Chinese squad or platoon or anything of the sort.
Well, he's denying things that doesn't seem to cover what you found. Is that the way it reads to you?
Well, I think there's a few things to kind of pick up on in there. I mean, one is that Cuba doesn't have much interest in revealing what it may or may not be doing at these facilities, especially if they have been set up, at least in part, to spy on the United States. The second is, and this is a really important aspect here, is that these sites, the value that they provide really comes from both the data that's collected, but then also the ways in which that data is interpreted to derive meaning. So even if they were fully operated by Cuban authorities, that information and that data could still be shared with counterparts like China. Every country in the world spies on each other. It's a pretty well-known fact, and it makes a lot of sense for China to have an interest in trying to use Cuba's proximity to the United States to gain valuable intelligence insights into the U.S. military and other aspects of how operations occur, both within and in the general proximity of the United States.
How concerning is this, given what you just said, which is that we all spy on each other and all the rest of it? But, obviously China is America's greatest competitor.
Well, on one hand, the good news is that the U.S. is, does everything in its power to protect its sensitive information and sensitive communications. And so there's that side of it. What I think is really important here is not necessarily concern, but awareness. it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that great power competition, geopolitical rivalries, that's something that happens somewhere else, right? It happens overseas. It happens in the Pacific. It happens in Europe. But importantly and increasingly, it's also happening in the backyard of the United States. China is interested in expanding its global footprint, and this is just one of the many echoes that we see of that happening. And so when we're thinking about U.S.-China rivalry, it's not just something that's happening in the Pacific, it's also something that's happening closer to home as well.
And very briefly, that brings me to the spy balloon. What do we know about that? Was that a real thing to get spun up about, or is, give us a sense of that seriousness relative to what you've discovered?
Well, I think that the instrumentation that you would see at the facilities in Cuba would offer a lot more granularity than what you would get on a spy balloon. A spy balloon is a little bit hard to control once it's up in the air and can really only kind of follow a specific type of flight path. What I think this gets into, though, is the broader context. It's not just about one facility or one asset or one particular instance. What we're looking at is an environment in which China is trying to learn more about the United States. It's trying to learn more about how the U.S. operates. It's trying to learn more about how the U.S. military operates. And all of those things combined provide us with a little bit more texture into how we should interpret U.S.-China relations going forward.
Matthew Funiole from CSIS. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you very much.
Nearly 7 years after a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, ended in violence, organizers of the 2017 Unite the Right rally are being ordered to pay up. The decision by a 3-judge panel ends a 4-year-long battle over damages from a civil trial against 24 white nationalists who participated in the rally. They were first ordered to pay $24 million in punitive damages, payments meant to punish as opposed to compensate for losses. The $24 million was later slashed to $350,000 total because of a state law. But Tuesday, judges ruled the 8 plaintiffs in the case were entitled to $350,000 each, bringing the total to $2 million in punitive damages. Despite air travel hitting record highs this year, the FAA says flight cancellations are near record lows. The agency says 1.4% of all flights were canceled in the first half of this year. That's the lowest rate since 2016. The trickle of cancellations that did occur were the result of bad weather, according to the Transportation Department. AAA estimates a record 5.7 million people will travel by air this holiday weekend. That's up 7% from last year and up 12% from 2019. During the War of 1812, as the British advanced on the White House to burn it, First Lady Dolly Madison saved the portrait of George Washington from destruction. Now a portrait of Madison herself has been saved from ruin, a daguerreotype from 1846, taken when the wife of the 4th president was 80 years old. It was found in a basement recently when the owners cleaned up after the death of a relative. According to Sotheby's auction house, which is managing the public sale, it is the first known picture ever of a First Lady. Fitting for Dolly Madison, since her social style and outreach to the public have led her to be credited with creating the role of the First Lady. The term itself was first used in her eulogy. The portrait is expected to sell for up to $70,000. Coming up, a deadly airstrike in Gaza's second-largest city. Our Holly Williams has a report from Tel Aviv. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The first sitting Democrat, that is to say a Democrat in office, has called on President Biden to withdraw from the 2024 race. Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas said the president's debate performance last week did not reassure voters and that there's a lot riding on this election. When asked about the congressman's comments, the Biden campaign said, quote, absolutely not. Rudy Giuliani can no longer practice law in New York. The former New York City mayor and federal prosecutor was disbarred Tuesday for making false statements about the 2020 presidential election. An appeals court determined he repeatedly lied about former President Trump's election laws. Giuliani already had his New York license suspended in 2021. His spokesman called Tuesday's decision objectively flawed and said Giuliani would appeal. And Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell says while inflation is slowing, it's not quite time for the central bank to cut interest rates. While speaking at a panel in Portugal Tuesday, Powell said officials would like to see the rate of price increases fall to 2%. Right now, that number sits at 2.6%. The United States and Panama signed an agreement Monday to block migrants who use the treacherous Darién Gap jungle to reach the American southern border. Under the joint initiative, American officials will help the Panamanian government deport migrants who entered Panama illegally from Colombia using the largely lawless corridor. In recent years, Panama has reported record numbers of crossings along the road in the Darien jungle, including over 500,000 in 2023 alone. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us from Douglas, Arizona. Camilo, how significant is this agreement? Well, we'll start there.
Hi, John. This agreement with Panama is the latest step taken by the Biden administration to try to reduce illegal crossings here along the U.S. Mexico border. And it is also the latest measure that the administration has taken to take a more regional approach to this incredibly vexing and complex issue of migration across the Western Hemisphere. As you mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security is now preparing to send a team of U.S. immigration officials and asylum officers to Panama to help their counterparts there screen migrants who make asylum claims, but also to deport and repatriate migrants who are not able to meet the eligibility requirements for legal protection in Panama. And most of these migrants, as you well underscored, are crossing the notorious Darién jungle that divides Panama and South America. Hundreds of thousands of migrants, John, have been crossing this roadless jungle that divides Panama and Colombia to try to reach the U.S. in recent years, including 500,000 just last year.
And how's the cost? Who's going to cover the cost of doing these deportations?
This will all be subsidized, John, via State Department funds. The Congress was already notified that the State Department will be sending money and allocating funds towards this effort. And again, it is an American-driven and subsidized program, but it is important to underscore, John, that Panamanian authorities will be the ones screening migrants and deporting them to countries like Venezuela or other nations across Latin America that are seeing some of their citizens cross the Darién jungle. The U.S. will not directly be involved in deporting people. The extent of the help that the U.S. will provide will be limited to training and financial assistance.
Panama's new president, who took office on Monday, has faced pressure to curb the illegal immigration. What's his, how's he responding to this, or what's he saying about this?
Yeah, Panama's new president has taken a very tough stance against migrant arrivals across the Darién Gap, vowing to close the jungle to migrants and also accusing international aid workers who work in this region of facilitating illegal immigration. It is still very unclear how the new president would be able to accomplish a goal of closing the border. We've heard that rhetoric here in the U.S., John, and as you know, closing a border is not an easy task for sure, and some say it is actually impossible because of operational, logistical, and legal reasons. But that is what the president in Panama has vowed to do, to close the border to recent arrivals. And this agreement with the U.S. certainly indicates that this new administration in Panama wants to deport more people from the Darién Gap and reduce the number of people who are crossing that jungle.
Camilla, this agreement has apparently been in the works for months. What do you make of the timing of this announcement?
Yes. Well, as you know, the Biden administration has been taking several actions to try to curb illegal immigration here at the border. More recently, the administration issued that sweeping executive action by President Biden that is disqualifying most migrants from being able to request and win asylum here at the border. That has allowed U.S. border officials, John, as we have discussed, to more quickly deport thousands of migrants on a weekly basis to Mexico across this wall or to their home countries without allowing them to request asylum in the first place. The administration also announced today, John, that it conducted the first repatriation flight to China since 2018. We have seen record numbers of Chinese migrants come to the border in recent years. And so this agreement with Panama, is the latest effort in this broader campaign by the Biden administration to try to reduce the number of people crossing the border before the election. And so far, U.S. officials would say that these policies are working. We have seen a dramatic drop in illegal crossings. In June, Border Patrol recorded the lowest level in illegal crossings along the border since President Biden took office.
Camila Montoya-Galvez in Douglas, Arizona. Thank you, Camila. Palestinian health officials say an Israeli strike has killed 9 people in Gaza's second largest city. The report comes less than 24 hours after Israel ordered civilians in the area to leave their homes. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams has more. Holly?
Good evening, John. Israel's military has ordered a mass evacuation of Palestinians from the eastern part of Khan Yunis. That's Gaza's second largest city in the southern Gaza Strip. The evacuation order was sent via audio message on cell phones and via social media. The United Nations says the Israeli order will force 250,000 people from their homes. The evacuation could indicate another Israeli ground assault is imminent, triggered by a barrage of around 20 rockets that Israel says Palestinian militants fired from Khan Yunis on Monday. Israeli troops withdrew from the city in April, leaving entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The Israeli military's return would highlight just how difficult it is to destroy Hamas, Israel's stated goal in this bloody conflict. With the war now in its 9th month, some Hamas leaders still at large and many Israeli hostages still captive, Israel's top generals want a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it keeps Hamas in power. That's according to a New York Times report, which claims there's a deepening rift between Israel's military leaders and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu refuted that report today, saying, quote, "We will not capitulate to the winds of defeatism at the New York Times or anywhere else. We are inspired by the spirit of victory." John.
Holly Williams in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Holly. Ukraine says it thwarted a coup attempt that would have, quote, played into Russia's hands. The country's security service said Monday a group of people were going to start a riot in the capital, then take control of parliament and remove leaders from office. It's unclear at this point if Russia, which invaded Ukraine more than 2 years ago, had any involvement in the plan. Officials say they've identified 4 suspects. 2 of them are in custody. If convicted, they face up to 10 years in prison. The United States will give Ukraine another $2.3 billion in security assistance. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made the announcement as he met with the country's defense minister at the Pentagon Tuesday. The aid will include anti-tank weapons, interceptors, and other air defense systems. The United States has committed over $53 billion in military assistance to Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion in February 2022. As we've been reporting, there have been questions over President Biden's health following last week's debate. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the former head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, worked closely with the president and helped lead the nation's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Our Major Garrett spoke to Dr. Fauci for this week's episode of the Takeout podcast and asked him about the president's health and debate performance.
Did you see the debate?
I did.
Did anything about that, what you saw, medically alarm you?
You know, I can't say. I think it would be inappropriate to say that, Major, because when you're just looking at someone on a one-shot basis, you just don't know what could happen. Did he have a bad cold? You know, did he take an antihistamine to make him, groggy or what have you? We don't know what went on. And I think it would be unfair and inappropriate to try and diagnose something from just a 90-minute clip.
And you can listen to Major's full conversation with Dr. Fauci on The Takeout on Wednesday. You can download that episode wherever you get your podcasts. You can also stream the interview on Sunday at 10:30 p.m. Eastern right here on CBS News. 60 years ago, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Coming up, we'll take a look back at the historic legislation and how President Biden is marking the anniversary. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail.
What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
an original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The Food and Drug Administration has given its approval to a new Alzheimer's treatment by drug maker Eli Lilly. The company says the treatment, called Kisunla, will be available within weeks. The treatment is not a cure, but clinical trials show the medicine can slow some of the effects of Alzheimer's, including memory loss. Eli Lilly's drug has previously faced challenges from the FDA. The agency had said it was concerned about long-term safety data, but after the company submitted more information, an FDA advisory panel finally voted in favor of approving the drug last month. Kisunla is the third ever Alzheimer's drug to win FDA approval. There is a 100% chance that this summer will be among the 5 hottest on record, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The persistent heat will occasion the reminder that scientists have warned that unless the countries of the world cut in half the amount of global greenhouse gas emissions released every year by 2030, the world will keep breaking global temperature records. Extreme weather events will become more common and sea levels will rise. Though progress has been slow, a global shift in the way the world produces energy has started. This year, the world will spend twice as much on clean energy, including solar, wind, and nuclear, as fossil fuels. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, credited the shift to an acceleration in clean energy spending, supply chain woes receding, and falling prices on items like solar panels. Solar, in particular, is seeing a major boost. For the second year in a row, the IEA expects more spending on solar panels, that's production, installation, research, than any other type of energy combined. This matters because more panels connecting to the grid serves not just individual homes, but creates a surplus to be used in areas that get less sun. And the growth builds on itself. The more solar is used, the lower the wholesale cost because it's cheaper to produce and an unlimited resource, not affected by scarcity like oil is, as long as there are tools created to harness it. The technology is also becoming more efficient. For every dollar spent last year on wind and solar technology, it created 2.5 times more energy than if you spent that same dollar a decade ago. And as renewables are used more all over the world, but the world keeps producing the same amount of fossil fuels, there will be more oil than people need. The IEA estimates that by 2030, because of reduced demand and a surge in global oil production, especially in the United States, there will be 8 million more barrels of oil produced per day than needed. But the story is not uniform across the globe. In emerging markets, which experience rapid growth and industrialization, the energy transition has been slower. Those nations, like India and Nigeria, only account for about 15% of clean energy spending. But they suffer a disproportionate share of climate risk, since they are in regions prone to climate-related disasters like hurricanes, floods, drought. Weak infrastructure and rapid urbanization make those disasters worse, affecting core sectors of those countries like agriculture and forestry. Developing nations are catching up, though. Clean energy spending is estimated to be up 50% in emerging markets this year compared to 2020, roughly on pace with advanced markets. The IEA lauded the progress made so far in transitioning globally to greener energy, but warned the current pace is not fast enough. The world needs to double the amount spent yearly on renewable energy in order to meet its climate goals. The Occupation Safety and Health Administration, known as OSHA to its friends and family, has proposed the first piece of major U.S. regulation aimed at preventing worker heat deaths. The rule would protect indoor and outdoor workers. When temperatures hit 80 degrees, employers would be required to provide workers with water and break areas. At 90 degrees, it would require monitoring for signs of heat illness, mandatory breaks every 2 hours, and check-ins on employees working alone. The proposal comes as 45 million Americans are forecast to experience temperatures of 100 degrees or higher this week. It's expected to face legal opposition from major employers and industry groups. Tuesday marks the 60th anniversary of President Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act into law.
The purpose of this law is simple. It does not restrict the freedom of any American so long as he respects the rights of others. It does not give special treatment to any citizen. It does say the only limit to a man's hope for happiness and for the future of his children shall be his own ability.
The landmark 1964 legislation prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. It also outlawed employment discrimination and the segregation of schools. In a statement marking its anniversary, President Biden said, quote, "Securing our civil rights remains the unfinished fight of our time." The president vowed to continue working for equality through legislation, job creation, and investment in black colleges and communities. One high school track star is spending his summer vacation at the Olympics. Up next, we'll tell you about the teen sensation who is making history. We are streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time. Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Authorities in South Korea are asking hikers to stop noodling around. Officials maintaining the country's highest mountain, Mount Hala, say leftover broth from instant ramen brought by visitors is posing a threat to the environment. According to the Korea Times, people visiting the mountain are dumping between 26 and 31 gallons of ramen broth in the area per day. This poses a threat to streams from runoff contaminating the water. It also threatens endangered plant species growing on the mountain. To curb the issue, the national park has set up 5 containers where hikers can safely dispose of ramen broth. Teen track star Quincy Wilson will be making history when he runs at the 2024 Paris Olympics next month. The 16-year-old will be the youngest American male to be part of the Olympic track team. Wilson will race in the 4x400 relay pool after making it to the end of the 400-meter final at the U.S. Olympic trials last month. And he broke some records while qualifying. He beat the world's under-18 400-meter record twice. The opening ceremony for the 2024 Paris Olympics begins on Friday, July 26th. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. The fallout over President Biden's debate performance continues, with at least one sitting Democrat calling for Biden to drop out of the race. How the president and his team are trying to rebuild confidence among Democrats and voters. We're tracking Hurricane Beryl as the powerful storm makes its way toward Jamaica. We'll bring you a report from the ground in Montego Bay. And the United States will soon begin helping Panama deport migrants crossing at a popular point for people trying to reach the southern border. We'll break down this latest initiative. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make